Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue pour cette conférence Montessori pour le grand âge. Alors nous allons encore attendre peut-être 1 ou 2 minutes pour commencer la conférence. Vous avez la possibilité de suivre cette conférence en anglais ou en français. Vous choisissez sur votre compte Zoom la possibilité, en tout cas la langue que vous souhaitez poursuivre la conférence. Donc vous avez normalement sur votre écran les indications pour vous connecter, donc le globe et ensuite anglais ou français. Ce sera plus simple en tout cas pour nous suivre pour l'heure et demie qui va arriver. Alors, je vous propose de commencer. Donc, je suis Sophie ROUILLOUX, la directrice générale de l'Institut Supérieur Montessori. L'Institut Supérieur Montessori est une association loi 1901, centre de formation professionnelle, créé depuis 1998 et agréé par l'association Montessori internationale. Nous délivrons principalement des diplômes d'éducateurs, d'assistants et de chefs d'établissement Montessori pour la petite enfance, pour l'enfance et des diplômes de praticiens pour les personnes âgées. Alors, l'ISMM s'est rapproché du groupe IGENSIA Education en mars 2024 avec l'ambition pour les deux associations de créer un projet éducatif innovant. Nos deux associations partagent les mêmes valeurs fondamentales humanistes, dont celle de respecter la singularité de chacun pour créer une société plus harmonieuse et plus inclusive. L'ISMM a toujours œuvré auprès des enfants, auprès des adolescents, auprès des personnes âgées. Et IGENSIA Education se concentre sur l'accompagnement des jeunes adultes. Nous portons cette ambition commune, offrir cette vision d'harmonie à tous les âges de la vie. Alors aujourd'hui, cette conférence que nous allons commencer va se concentrer sur la singularité des personnes âgées, en les mettant en lumière, non pas pour ce qu'elles ne savent plus faire, mais en se focalisant vraiment sur tout ce qu'elles savent encore accomplir. Parce qu'en fait, c'est en reconnaissant justement leurs capacités préservées, en les mettant en avant, que nous allons pouvoir enrichir notre regard sur elles et que nous allons pouvoir construire une société qui les inclut et qui les respecte pleinement parce qu'elles ont tant à nous apprendre. J'ai le plaisir d'accueillir aujourd'hui Anne Kelly avec moi pour cette conférence, qui va nous expliquer comment l'approche Montessori peut précisément nous aider à accompagner les personnes âgées. Anne, vous êtes une infirmière diplômée, experte en matière d'application des principes Montessori pour la démence, le handicap et les soins aux personnes âgées. Vous êtes actuellement directrice générale de Montessori Consulting Australia et vous êtes également la responsable du département pour la démence, le handicap et le vieillissement au sein de l'association Montessori internationale. Vous avez passé plus de 40 ans à accompagner justement les personnes âgées dans les pratiques de soins, mais aussi au travers d'actions de formation, au travers d'accompagnement directement auprès des équipes. Et aujourd'hui, c'est avec grand plaisir que vous allez pouvoir nous faire partager toute votre connaissance. Vous êtes considéré aujourd'hui comme un leader australien, mais aussi un leader international du soin aux personnes âgées et de cet accompagnement. Et vous avez publié en 2017 votre premier livre qui s'intitule « Forgetfulness, Feelings and Forknacklings ». Alors j'ai beaucoup aimé m'amuser à traduire le titre qui pourrait se traduire « oubli, sentiment » et peut-être « farfelucherie », qui est un mot qui n'existe pas, mais qui évoque à la fois des situations absurdes, farfelues, tout en gardant une connotation légère et humoristique, et qui reflète bien l'esprit des moments imprévisibles ou décalés que vivent les personnes atteintes de troubles de la mémoire et les personnes qui accompagnent ces personnes. Anne, je vous propose de vous laisser la parole et de commencer tout simplement par nous expliquer Montessori pour la démence, le handicap et le vieillissement. Qu'est-ce que cela signifie ?
After 30 hours of travel, I arrived in Paris, so it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm getting very old. 45 years I have been working in aged care, and over that time I became more and more concerned about how we deliver care and support to the elders that we're privileged to care for. And so I was very blessed 15 years ago to stumble across Montessori for dementia and ageing. And really I've been working in that area since that time. And I think that most people have heard about Montessori schools, and when they think of Montessori, they think entirely of Montessori being applicable to children. But, you know, it doesn't matter what age we are, whether we're 3 years of age, 33 or 103. We all need to feel that we matter. We all need to have a reason to get out of bed every day. And so it is the philosophy and ethos, if you like, that transfers over into aged care. I just need to get my... It is based on the original work of Dr. Maria Montessori, and I guess that she was an amazing woman for her time, and she really opened the door for women in medicine moving forward. But her early work, she was very interested in psychiatry, and that's what brought her into contact with children with special needs. And she believed that there had to be a better way of working with these children who were considered to be unteachable. They were called mental defectives. And she believed that there must be a better way to work with them to improve the quality of life and outcomes for these children. And so, of course, as many of the audience would know, she set a precedent for education and has left a big legacy in early childhood development and how we work with young children. Now, the children, she put the principles in place that she believed that the environment needed to support the child. And so she set up the environment to support the child. So for the first time in history, we saw things like little tables, little chairs, little hand basins and little toilets. You know, that's one of her legacies that she left us. She also believed that if the children had roles in the classroom and contributed to the running of the classroom, that their behaviour would improve. And so that she gave children the jobs of sweeping the floor, pouring the drinks, those sorts of things. And now she also believed that the children were able to learn if they had things to do at their level of ability, and that they could always find something of interest to do in the classroom. And so, of course, she put all her principles in place, and some of the children that she originally worked with made very good progressions and actually got their high school certificate, which was something that people didn't believe that they were able to do. Now, the children that Maria Montessori worked with were considered to be unteachable. Many of the people living with dementia are considered to be unteachable. And if we believe that people living with dementia were able to learn, then we wouldn't have behaviours such as repetitive questioning. And so in traditional aged care, traditional dementia care, we see many people living in care communities who are unable to find their room. They have repetitive questioning about what time's lunch, when's my husband coming, and we don't try and teach them that information. So in a Montessori environment, it is looking at what people can do, and it's understanding that people with dementia can learn. Many of them can learn. And it's about looking at whether people are able to learn, and if they are, how do we teach people? How awful would it be to live in a place where you can't find your room? You can't find anything that's familiar. You can't find your bedroom. And so in a Montessori environment, we would go about putting strategies in place to teach the person to find their room, for example. Now, also, the children that Maria Montessori originally worked with were considered to be mental defectives. Now, you know, we would lose our jobs these days if we called somebody living with dementia a mental defective. And yet many of the practices that we have in place rob people of their independence, their dignity, their personhood. And so we need to look at the environments that we create for people and understand that there is always a reason for behaviour, and that they say the more impaired the person, the more the environment will account for their behaviour. So we need to look at the environments that we create for people. And so it is really, when we talk about where does Montessori for dementia, disability and ageing come from, it's really from that philosophy and ethos of Dr. Maria Montessori. And that is, of course, one of independence, enabling people to be as independent as possible. We're very, very good in our industry at looking at what people can't do, because that's what we support. We support them to be able to dress themselves or feed themselves. In a Montessori prepared environment, we look at what strengths do people have and how can we use those strengths to improve quality of life and to give people reason and meaning. It's also about looking at self-esteem, and you know, it must be absolutely terrible to sit in a care community waiting to die. And in traditional aged care, we often rob people of purpose. You know, they come in, they move into aged care as fathers, grandfathers, handymen, the lawnmower, the gardener, the churchgoer, the friend, the confidant. So they have so many roles, and yet they move into aged care and all of a sudden they can lose those roles and they just become a person living with dementia. So it's about high self-esteem. It's also about people being able to make true choices. We set up systems in aged care where people are robbed of the ability to make choices. So, you know, how do we, set up an environment that really enables people to make choices? Also, people not only want to be supported and cared for, if you like, they also want to care for others. So giving people, enabling people to feel valued, to have a contribution, to be able to contribute to their care community. Now, that care community can be anywhere. It can be their own home. It can be a day centre that they go to 3 or 4 times a week, or it can be a care community where they live 24 hours a day. How do we create environments where people feel valued? So Montessori environments really focus on using preserved abilities, what people can do. It's also about modifying the environment. How do we set up an environment to support memory loss? How do we set up an environment that enables people to be the very best that they can be? It's also about providing education and support for the team members at work with people who are living with dementia and elderly people. We need to offer support and we need to educate people. It's also about involving families. We say in many of the care communities I've worked in, if we admit a person into the care community, we've actually admitted their family, because it's more than just the person. It's they have a family. And so it is involving families and it is working with families as well as the person who is the primary person in care, if you like. We focus on what we call a 4W model. this is who is the person, so, and then the 3 whats. So when I talk about that, we've known for many years that you can't provide care to anybody without knowing who they are. All of us have our own life stories. Our life stories, our experiences are what make us who we are today. And we need to be able to understand somebody's life stories to be able to provide them with the best support. And we, what strengths do people have? What are their stories? What is their diagnosis? People living with different types of dementia will have different symptoms of that dementia. It's important that we understand that. Their reading ability. What are they able to read and what size font do they need to read? So very important. One of the things that we often forget is that if people have been able to read prior to a diagnosis of dementia, they can often read late into the disease process. So if somebody's still able to read, that opens a whole world of opportunities to work with that person. And so what are their needs and what is important to them? Sometimes we fall into the trap of deciding what is important for somebody. We need to connect with the person, what is important to them. So the first W is who is the person, absolutely crucial. And then what do you see? If we just stood back and watched somebody in their environment, what is it that we see? Things like, can they find their own room? Do they know where the bathroom is? Do they know where to sit in the dining room? Can they get themselves dressed? Do they interact with other people? Do they initiate activity or conversation? What are they like when their family visit? What are they like when their family go? What responsive behaviours to the environment do the people have? And so the third W is what are we going to do about what we know and what we see? For example, there's no point at all seeing that somebody can't find their bedroom and not doing anything about addressing that need. So what are we going to put in place? Now, it may be signage. In Montessori, we use a lot of signage, a lot of wayfinding for people. It may be a cue card. We use cue cards that provide information to people who have repetitive questioning. The reason why somebody has repetitive questioning is because they can't keep the information in here. So what you can't keep in here, you need to put into the environment for people. So things like signage and cue cards become really important. Task breakdown. People living with dementia can often have a sequencing deficit, which means that they lose steps of an action, such as getting themselves dressed. They will forget steps or the order that they get themselves dressed in. Well, in traditional aged care, we would just take over dressing that person. In a Montessori environment, we put in place a strategy such as task breakdown that tells them the steps to follow to get dressed. If they're able to follow steps, they will dress themselves appropriately. So that's the sort of thing that you look at with what strategies are you going to put in place. And then, of course, the fourth W is what is the outcome? There's no point at all of doing anything in our work unless we're going to evaluate was it successful, wasn't it? If it wasn't, what might we change next time? So, it's a model that, looks, the crucial part is who is the person.
Et Anne, ce que je trouve vraiment, en tout cas, très marquant dans ce que vous nous expliquez là, c'est l'importance de l'observation, qui est quand même la clé d'entrée de Montessori. Observer, savoir à qui nous avons affaire, et c'est par cette observation que nous allons être capables justement d'adresser ce soin aux personnes âgées et surtout de changer notre regard. Et pour vous, justement, dans notre société aujourd'hui, qu'est-ce qu'on doit absolument changer, en fait, par rapport à ce regard que nous avons sur les personnes atteintes de troubles de la mémoire, les personnes âgées ?
Yes, I always say that one of the best skills that any of us can have is the skill of observation. Often people living with dementia are unable to tell you so much. They feel it, but they can't express it. And our skills of observation become crucial in providing good, respectful and kind care to people. We often think about practices of why we need to change what we do. And Sophie, a lot of people will say, but why do we need to change what we do when we deliver good care? And we don't have complaints. You know, our families are happy and our staff are happy. There are many reasons why we need to change what we do. And I guess that, you know, it is a paradigm shift in what we do in Montessori compared to traditional aged care. The practices that we need to change, I always talk about, are things like medication, sleeping, areas of dining or eating, as well as, you know, how we set people up to be successful, and language we use around people who are living with dementia needs to be also respectful. We hear there's a lot of poor language out there in aged care. Poor language around, you know, how we refer to people living with dementia. Just recently I was in a care community and one of the staff members who worked there said, oh, that's where our dementias live. You know, people are not dementias, you know, people living with dementia. That's very disrespectful. Or these are our demented people that live in this area. Medication, just looking at the practices that need to change, there is still no doubt that we use way too much medication in the management of people living with dementia. And we use medication mostly for things like agitation. When people are distressed. You know, people can be distressed for a whole lot of reasons, but a lot of times they're distressed because of the environment. And if we look at the environment and we set the environment up for success for the person, you'll often find that there is a reduction in the level of agitation. You know, one of the comments that you hear a lot in aged care from people living with dementia is, I want to go home. Oh, I do want to go home. I want to go home. Now, from all my years of nursing practice, home is not about a place. Home is a feeling. Home is a feeling. I always say to people, when I hear residents, people living with dementia saying, I want to go home, I want to go home, I don't hear that. What I hear is, I'm scared, I don't know where I am, I can't find anything that's familiar to me, and I don't know who all these strangers are that are in my environment. So again, it's about looking at environment. If you can make people feel at home, you can make them feel safe, you can give them purpose, and you can reduce the anxiety associated, often associated with dementia, then you don't have the level of agitation that you will often see in traditional aged care. So, you know, the first thing we need to change is that medication and look at other strategies. First and foremost. Now, that isn't to say that there are not times when medication is warranted. I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's about correct assessment. It's about knowing the person. It's about looking at strategies and trying everything first rather than jumping straight to the use of psychotropic medication. That also goes into the next point, which is we need to change the whole area of sleeping and bedtime. You know, I think for at least 25, 30 years, we have known that if people are left to sleep, to wake naturally, they are more compliant with personal care, they eat better, and they have a better day. That's what the research tells us. Yet here we are in 2024, we are still waking elderly people up to get them out of bed for an 8 o'clock breakfast. And, you know, one of the residents that I worked with some time ago, she said to me when she was in the breakfast room at 8 o'clock in the morning, she said, "Don't they know we're old? We don't want to get up at 7 o'clock." And so, you know, why do we do that? We do that because in most care communities, breakfast is at 8 o'clock. And so if people don't get up at 8 o'clock, they miss out on breakfast. Now in Montessori, we would put in a breakfast buffet. In fact, we put buffet meal services in for all meals, but the first one we do is breakfast. And we make it so that breakfast can start at 7 o'clock in the morning and it finishes at 10:30 in the morning. People have until 10:30 to get out of bed. The other crazy thing is that people are in bed often by 6:30 at night. I go into many care communities around the world and you can shoot a cannon down the corridor at 6 o'clock at night and not hit anybody. And it's because they're all in bed. And then they're in bed at 6, they wake up at 2. So what do? We give them medication so that they go back to sleep at 2 o'clock. You know, sometimes some of the practices that we have are practices that are archaic, that we haven't actually really thought about. That's crazy. If you wish people to sleep, then keep them up and they go to bed at 9 and 10 o'clock at night. Some of the best Montessori units that we have, the residents are still up at 9 o'clock at night enjoying life. Then they have supper, then they go to bed. Guess what? They're sleeping better. The use of medication for people to sleep is diminished greatly. So, you know, it's about the system that's been there for a long, long time. Eating, dining is also another area that we need to look at. Something strange can happen to you, Sophie, when you get a diagnosis of dementia. All of a sudden, if you move into care, you often get plastic cups to drink out of. And in some care communities I've been to, not only are the mugs and the cups plastic, but so are the plates that people eat off. Now, plastic mugs are great for picnics and barbecues, but how would any of us like to drink our tea or coffee out of plastic for the rest of our lives? So how we serve meals and how we honour people in meal service becomes really important. You know, not giving heaven, if you do go into care, Sophie, be careful when you're asked what you want to drink, right? Because if you go in on day one and you say, actually, I like coffee with milk and 2 sugars, well, in many care communities, that's what you're going to get until the day you die. Now, for you, and I'm sure for me, I like tea sometimes and I like coffee, and sometimes I want juice. I don't want a hot drink at all. But again, we have a system often in place in traditional aged care where everybody will get what you say on the first day for the rest of their lives. Now, I do need to say that there are some pockets of excellent care. But I always say that every elderly person deserves the best care possible. And sometimes it's a bit of luck as to where you end up, where you spend your final days. And we need to make sure that everybody's final days are the best days possible for them. And it's not a matter of luck that you go to this care community and they're fabulous, or you end up in this care community who have a lot of care practices that they haven't changed. You know, it's about also giving people choice. You know, we found that if you put meal service in place for people, then where they're able to choose what they wish to eat, they actually eat better and they choose what they want and they're able to do that. One of the things that we do for many of the people in aged care is we create excess disability. And that is disability that is not associated with the disease. Many people living with dementia do have an actual disability associated with their disease. But excess disability arises from taking away what people can do. So, for example, we create excess disability when we use a wheelchair to take somebody to the dining room rather than letting them walk, or dressing a person who's quite able to dress themselves, it's just that they're slow. And so we take on doing those things for people, but in actual fact we're taking those things away from people. So important to allow people that are living with cognitive impairment to do for themselves what they're able to. Don't take away what they can do, because there are so many things that they're unable to do. You know, don't take away what they can do.
Et en fait, là on revient, Anne, à l'idée d'aide utile que nous avons en pédagogie Montessori, d'aider lorsque c'est nécessaire, mais seulement lorsque c'est nécessaire. Parce qu'autrement, c'est une entrave à l'autonomie, une entrave à l'autonomie de la personne âgée, à sa capacité justement à faire par elle-même et justement à contribuer plus largement à la communauté à laquelle elle appartient. Peut-être pour la prochaine partie, vous pourriez nous expliquer quels sont le rôle des différents types de mémoire pour l'aménagement de l'environnement. On a beaucoup parlé de l'environnement, de la manière de l'aménager. Il y a différents types de mémoire qu'on peut solliciter chez la personne âgée. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous en dire un petit peu plus sur comment aménager l'environnement ?
Understanding of memory systems is vital for our work in Montessori. And that, I always say that explains why we do what we do in a Montessori environment. So we have two types of memory. Okay. We have two types of memory. We have long-term memory, which consists of declarative and procedural memory, and of course we have short-term memory. But it's the long-term memory that we focus on in Montessori, declarative memory and procedural. Now, declarative memory, I always say declarative memory is what you went to school to learn. It's facts. It's things like the capital of France, or the cost of a loaf of bread, or important dates, the dates of marriages, or the birth dates of children, or of the war, or whatever. So it's factual. It is always impaired in people living with dementia. If it wasn't impaired in people living, if it wasn't impaired, they wouldn't have a diagnosis of dementia. So declarative memory or explicit memory, it's also called explicit memory, depends what book you pick up, will always be impaired. And so when it is impaired, we need to support it, that impairment, by putting the information into the environment. So hence, that's where we see signage, and we see cue cards, we see schedules for people. Things like my daughter visits me every day at 2:00. I go to the day centre every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. So we support declarative memory. What they can't keep in here, you need to put out there into the environment. And procedural memory is the other type of long-term memory. And procedural memory is a strength in people living with dementia, whereas declarative memory, always impaired, procedural memory is a strength. It is believed that procedural memory starts developing very, very early in life, and it's with us for a long time. And procedural memory cover things like skills, our habits, simple classical conditioning, and repetition priming. And it's really important for aged care Montessorians to understand the two types of memory and to understand what they comprise. Skills are important and are things that we've done over and over and over again. You know, things like cleaning your teeth, brushing your hair, going to the bathroom, getting ourselves dressed, learning to ride a bike. Is an example of a skill that you could learn. You might learn at the age of 5, but once you've learnt it, it's there almost for life. And so playing the piano. And this is a strength in people living with dementia. Habits are important. Habits are things that we've done every day or week at the same time in the same way. We all have our own habits. And habits are important for people, which again comes back to the importance of knowing people and what their habits were so that we can allow them to continue with their lifelong habits when they move into care or go, elsewhere to live. So important, because if you can't do something you've always done, that's going to lead to anxiety, it's going to lead to being upset and feeling as if you're not listened to, as if you're not important. What's an example? An example might be having a hot cup of cocoa before you go to bed at night, or showering at night, that the last thing you do before you hop into your bed is you've always had a shower. And if you move into a care community where that habit of a lifetime is not honoured, then that can lead to people who won't sleep. They can't settle to sleep because they have not been able to have a shower. I always think of the story which highlights habits. I received a referral for a lady who was aggressive. And I went in to do the assessment for this lady. The story was that this lady would be put to bed and she would get up, take a night dress off and get back into bed. The staff would go in, get her out of bed, put a night dress on and put her back into bed. She'd get up, take a night dress off and get back into bed. Now this would go on, and the more times they got her up, the more agitated she became. And it reached a crisis when she actually hit the nurse in the face and yelled at her to get away from her. And when I went back and looked at who is the person, the very first thing, the thing that was clearly there was that this lady had slept in the nud or in the nude her entire adult life. She'd never worn pyjamas. She didn't wear a singlet. She didn't wear a T-shirt. She didn't wear anything to bed. That's what was her lifetime habit. And so when I read that, I spoke to the manager and I said, why is this such a big issue? This woman has never slept in pyjamas. You're not going to get her to do that because it's a lifetime habit. And the manager looked at me and she said, Anne, the problem is that the staff find it offensive. And I just looked at her and I was amazed at, I said, don't the staff shower and dress this lady every day? And the manager looked at me and she said, oh yes, they do that, but this is different. So sometimes we run into barriers that illustrate how we just lost touch with who the people are that we're providing care for. So habits are very important, and if we can't follow them, you're going to get situations like that. And I mean, you know, there are many about, you know, drinking coffee before going to bed, having a beer, you know, lots and lots of habits that we all have. Even we have habits, I'm sure, about sitting in the same chair in our lounge areas or at the dining room table. We're all creatures of habit. And so, you know, when we move into communal living or into care communities, we need to see how can we address as best that we can somebody's habits of a lifetime. And the other thing that is really important about procedural memory is repetition priming. This means the more you do it, the better you get. Now, this is a really weird phenomenon about our brain. You can do something over and over again, and every time you do it, you are going to be better than the previous time, even if you've got a memory problem, even if you can never remember having ever done it before. Now, that is a really strange phenomenon and one of those amazing things about our brain. And this is a strength for people living with dementia. And as aged care Montessorians, we need to know that the first time a person does something, it may not be very good. But we know as a Montessorian that the second time they'll be better than the first, the third better than the second. And so that's why you never give up on people. You know, people living with dementia, we can give up on them. We don't try anymore. We give up, we think it's not worth it, they can't learn. I remember, you know, working with a lady, and it was a fine motor skill to enable her to keep feeding herself. You know, nobody wants to be fed. So if in Montessori, if we can see that somebody's losing that ability, we will put in place an activity that will keep those skills required for as long as possible. Anyway, I was working with this lady living with dementia, and we were doing this over and over again, and she stopped what she was doing. She looked me fair in the eyes and she said, "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on me." You know, often people living with dementia we give up on, and that's what that negative environment that we need to change in our work. So it's an understanding of long-term memory is crucial for our work.
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Anne. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez nous éclairer et nous donner, en tout cas, des conseils peut-être pour réussir à engager, j'ai envie de dire, toute la communauté autour de la personne âgée, autour de la personne qui a besoin de soins? Parce qu'évidemment, il y a la personne, l'aidant, qui est à côté, ça peut être dans les familles. Il y a la personne qui va être dans une care community. Il va y avoir aussi peut-être le management, donc toute la structure. Comment est-ce qu'on fait, quelque part, pour engager tout un écosystème autour de cette vision, j'ai envie de dire, de respect et d'inclusion de la personne âgée? Comment, avec votre expérience, est-ce que vous pouvez un petit peu nous donner des conseils autour de ça?
Everybody needs to be on the same path, and everybody's involved in the process. It is essential for organisations that the change is supported from the top, and that filters down. Training is so important. Every staff member who works in a care community needs to have training about what does Montessori mean for them, what does it look like, what is the outcome for the people that they're caring for, and how are they able to do it. And you've got to realise that aged care has taken a long time to get to this place. It's going to take a long time to change practice. I think that research is saying that changing culture in aged care is a 5-year process. You know, this doesn't happen overnight. For it to be sustainable And for it to be there in 5 years' time means that it's a slow process. And you only need the change of a manager, and all of a sudden all the good work can slip back. But everybody needs to be engaged. Families, families are an important part of the care team, and we need to educate families. Often for people living with dementia, families out of love will do things for people and almost create excess disability, not because for any other reason except, out of their duty of love for people. And it's working with families to understand, that Dad can dress himself. You need to allow him the time to do it, because that's something he can still do. Helping families to set up their homes to be supportive of the person and to enable independence. So we would work with, everybody who's associated with that person needs input, they need education, they need support, they need mentoring. Particularly in aged care, it isn't something that people can do off the end of their desk. There really needs to be a committed team member whose job it is to support other team members to roll out Montessori and to start thinking people will always do what they've always done because it's easier. Montessori environments means everything needs to change, and we need to support people at every step of that change process because it's new to them. They haven't done it before. They haven't ever worked like that before. One of the outcomes that we've found with putting Montessori in place is that staff are happier in the workplace. It was interesting initially in some of our memory care units, we couldn't get staff to work, enough staff to cover the roster, because who wants to work with people living with dementia all day, every day? And over time, they had waiting lists of staff who wanted to go in because staff were working in a better way. They were working in an enabling way. They were doing with, not doing for. And so it changed how staff worked. And so, of course, it changes the outcomes for staff. Just to give you a recent example, we started work in a 15-bed memory care unit that had major incidences every day. There were incident forms as a result of aggression completed every day. At least 1, 2, 3 major incidents a day. It was a huge issue for the organisation. And so they decided that they would, they learned about Montessori and decided they would look at a Montessori environment. And within weeks, with changing the environment, changing how care was delivered, the incidents no longer happened. There were no incidents. It isn't about people changing. People living with dementia, whilst they deteriorate over time, they don't have these dramatic changes. What changed was how care was provided. And when you change how care is provided and change the outcomes for the person, they are happier and they don't reach that crisis because staff step in, they divert, they're well trained, people have jobs to do. So it's about, again, the environment and, again, looking at how do we support the staff. It is always difficult, when there is no budget and when people are, or organisations have limited budgets, and they have many things that they need to attend to, things like lifting and infection control and health and safety, all of those things. And what we try and do is get Montessori up to be as important as fire, as important as infection control, as important as lifting training. It needs to be up there at that level of importance.
Okay. Merci Anne. Peut-être, vous pourriez peut-être partager en tout cas des exemples. Vous avez, je crois, sur certains de vos slides, des exemples justement d'affichage ou de manière justement de guider les personnes âgées dans les care centers que vous avez en tout cas accompagnés. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous en dire un peu plus voilà, sur, justement, vous parliez du buffet. Comment est-ce que vous travaillez avec les personnes pour les garder dans cette autonomie? Je pense qu'il y a des exemples très précis qui peuvent être éclairants, en fait, pour les personnes qui nous écoutent aujourd'hui.
Well, again, it's about just looking at that environment and how do you support people in the environment. Here, for example, are just, a couple of examples of appropriate signs that we use. How can I maintain continence if I can't find the toilet? So the bathroom and toilet becomes very important. How do I get around the community? We need signage. We call it wayfinding in dementia practice. Wayfinding becomes very important. How do I get to the dining room? And then how do I get back again? If I go out into the garden, how do I find my way back inside again? It's also about many of the skills for pouring drinks, serving food, they're things that people have done for years. It's part of procedural memory. However, they may not have been practising it for some time because they've lived in care for 3 years or 2 years. But because those things are part of procedural memory, they're very easy to reteach. So we have people, we set up hydration stations, for example, and instead of people having to rely on a team member or a family member to get them a drink, they're able to serve their own drinks. Now, we do risk assessment and we make sure that people aren't going to pour boiling water over their feet or over their arms or whatever. That's about risk assessment, and we would use a Montessori activity to teach them those skills again before they have the opportunity to pick up a teapot to pour a cup of tea. So an example of that might be that they start pouring sand, and so they'll start with sand, and they'll start in one place and they'll slowly progress to a place where they're all of a sudden being able to pour their drink, because it's easy to reteach that. And that's how, people often get panicky about Montessori in aged care. Oh my goodness, people are going to burn themselves, they're going to, eat it, slip on it, and we need to move past that. We also need to give people dignity of risk. We need to allow our elderly people to live and to live each day to the best. And we can't wrap them in cotton wool. And we're often so frightened that people are going to fall over or burn themselves that we take away their dignity and we take away their rights to take risks. Me coming here today in Paris traffic was a risk. Me flying halfway around the world was a risk. Risk's part of life. It's part of living. And we can't suddenly put people in an environment where we remove all risks, because when you remove all risks, you remove life. It becomes important to, set up our environments to enable people to be independent. So needless to say, of course, we've all heard the term person-centred care, and we talk about, person-centred care. The thing I love about Montessori is it is truly person-centred. You can't do Montessori without being totally focused on each person. What is their need? And team members who are skilled in a Montessori approach know that Jack is able to pour his own drink at the hydration station and carry it back to his chair. They also know that Mary's able to pour her drink, but she needs assistance to carry the cup back to her chair. And they know that Myrtle can stir the sugar and the milk into her cup of tea, but she's unable to pour it. And that's where staff step in, and the staff do what is needed, and only what is needed. And that's where being true person-centredness comes in, I believe. You know, a lot of care communities, they think that they deliver person-centred care, but they've got no idea it's care for the many. It's care for everybody. I learnt many years ago that people living with dementia are, you know, exactly that, one person living with dementia. There is no textbook person living with dementia. They're just like us. They're all individuals, and we need to connect with that individual to provide the best care.
Et dans tout ce process-là, Anne, il me semble que vous nous aviez aussi expliqué qu'il était très important d'agir vite. C'est-à-dire que plus on prend tôt une personne qui commence à être affectée par des troubles de la mémoire, plus justement on est capable d'agir sur l'environnement d'une manière efficace, c'est-à-dire ne pas attendre. Et ça, je pense que c'était un point qui est important, qui peut être aussi assez crucial à communiquer aux personnes qui nous écoutent.
Yes, it's really about putting strategies in place as early as possible for somebody living with dementia. You know, there are things that we can do early in the disease, and it really doesn't matter what stage somebody is at with their journey with dementia. There's always something that we can do in a Montessori focus and a Montessori way. You know, things like setting up their house for independence, things like using signage right from early times so that the more they see it, the more they're learning. Repetition priming, the more they do it, the better they get. And things like a strategy like spaced retrieval. Spaced retrieval is a fabulous strategy for people in early to mid-stage, and it works on prospective memory, and it works on what people are able to do. And we use a learning screen in Montessori to identify the people who are still able to learn, and then we can use strategies like signage with a combination of spaced retrieval to teach people information that will improve their independence, will keep them living at home, will keep them being able to do things for themselves. And, you know, that's very beneficial for people in early to mid-stage.
Merci beaucoup, Anne, en tout cas pour toutes ces explications. Ce que je vous propose maintenant, c'est peut-être de passer à une phase de questions-réponses. Voilà, donc je vais regarder. Vous avez la possibilité dans le chat d'envoyer vos questions. Et Anne, je vais pouvoir en tout cas vous transmettre les différentes questions qui arrivent. Alors, première question. L'individualisation nécessaire à la prise en compte des spécificités des personnes, la mémoire procédurale déclarative, tout en aménageant les modes de fonctionnement, est-elle compatible avec le fonctionnement managérial et salarial d'une communauté de soins ?
Yes, it is. There's always a challenge when you're dealing with a community that you're looking at caring for people in large numbers. But within that, if we change how we work with people, you can meet as much as possible people's individual preferences and needs. It is about, again, looking at the environment and again looking at what does that person need. Somebody might need a schedule in their room and other people don't. Or somebody needs a cue card that somebody else doesn't. So it's about that personalised adaptation of the principles to meet that person's needs.
Et je pense que derrière cette question, il y a aussi, parce qu'on a d'autres questions qui arrivent aussi, le point le fait que ce soit une approche quelque part, on va dire individualisée, qui adresse la singularité en fait de l'être humain. Est-ce que quelque part ça ne coûte pas plus cher à l'institution plutôt que de faire la même chose pour tous? Et comment justement est-ce qu'on arrive à apporter cette singularité, ce soin ciblé à la personne âgée dans des institutions, des grandes institutions qui ont l'habitude d'avoir des processus très normatifs, les mêmes pour tout le groupe. Ça demande sûrement une adaptation et peut-être un coût supplémentaire.
Well, one of the things about Montessori that for the organisations that we've worked with is that they get no more money than any other organisation. It's a different way of working. And whilst we talk about individual care, there are strategies and environmental strategies you put in place that are relevant for everybody, such as signage to the bathroom, such as buffet, such as labelling food. All of those things are relevant for large numbers of people. So you can set up your unit as a Montessori unit taking into account all of those general things, that we put in place. The personalised are the specific things for each person that is for them, such as what they enjoy doing or whether they need a schedule in their room. So it is a model that can be rolled out across an entire care community, and there are things that are put in place for everybody in that care community. It is, a good example is, simple things that people can do. One of the best examples is the use of name badges. If ever there were a group of people more than anybody in the entire world who need name badges, it's people living with dementia. They're unable to know who they're sitting with to eat their meals with, or sitting on the bus next to, or playing bingo with. They just don't know because they can't retain that information. So something as simple as using name badges for everybody can make a huge difference to how people feel and to how people interact with others in the environment.
Merci Anne. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous donner des exemples d'issues ou de ce que vous avez pu observer comme changement auprès des personnes atteintes des troubles de la mémoire en termes de bien-être émotionnel? Comment est-ce que vous avez pu observer cela? Comment est-ce que ça se manifeste sur la personne atteinte de démence?
Well, again, people living with dementia will often react to the environment. They react to how they feel, they react to what they see. They're taking information in from the environment through all their senses, and that will lead to their emotions or their feelings, right? That then leads to their thoughts or their thinking, and that will then lead to their behaviour. But it all comes from that physiological basis where they're taking information in from the environment. So we need, again, to think about our environment. It always comes back to the environment. And if you have people who are happier, then many of the behaviours that we see in traditional aged care just do not exist, because people are happier, they're more settled, and they're not as agitated. We see, what's an example? An example was a gentleman who lived in a care community, and the care community put in wrist-operated locks for the bedroom doors. So you'd go up to the door and you'd hold your wrist up to a plate on the door and the door would open. Now, this man knew where his room was before the lock went on. So then what happened was the locks went on and he gets so frustrated and so angry because he knew where his room was, but he couldn't get in the door. The door was locked. And the staff team member who was in the care community, who was Montessori trained, she did spaced retrieval with this man and taught him in 2 sessions that when he wanted to open his door, all he needed to do was hold his wrist up to the door. That his life changed because he knew how to do that. He could get to his room independently. So again, it's about what are somebody's needs and how do we, in a Montessori world, how do we address that need so that people are the best that they can be.
Alors, une question un petit peu différente, plus sur la prévention. Aujourd'hui, on a parlé effectivement de la méthode Montessori pour le soin, pour les personnes atteintes de troubles de la mémoire, pour les personnes âgées. Mais est-ce que la méthode Montessori intègre des notions de prévention avant l'arrivée de la démence ?
Unfortunately, Montessori doesn't prevent dementia. I guess that, when we talk about Montessori, we really talk about a way of life. And we know that one of the things that can influence the progression of dementia or is social isolation, not being involved in living, being socially isolated. We know about brain neuroplasticity. We know about, part of Montessori. We would say in Montessori, push the brain to work. You've got to push cognition. If we allow people to sit and vegetate and do nothing, that's exactly what happens. So we push people to use cognitive function. And we know for prevention and progression of dementia that, again, use it or lose it. We've heard the term and we use the term, use it or lose it. And it's so applicable just for us in everyday life. And, we know, one of the things we talk about in Montessori, is mobility, keeping people mobile. That's important in everyday life as it is in aged care, keeping people physically active. In care communities, it's vitally important. The minute somebody becomes non-ambulant, the team members' work has just increased because somebody requires assistance with transfers from wheelchair to bed or to the bathroom. We have a vested interest in keeping people physically moving. Same applies before we even get to that stage, just in general life, keeping people moving, keep using our cognitive function. All of those things lead to good, healthy outcomes for adults.
Anne, une question très pratico-pratique. Comment doit-on réagir? Comment peut-on réagir face au comportement répétitif de la personne qui s'adresse à nous, qui répète les mêmes choses? Comment peut-on faire?
Okay, now I guess that it depends what the repetition is about. Remember every time is the first time for somebody living with dementia. Every time they say something or ask the question, it is the first time. So what becomes very important for us in our practice is to have team members who are respectful and kind and who respond in an appropriate way as you would respond to the first time somebody's asking something. What can tend to happen in traditional aged care is that people get annoyed and frustrated. You know, that's the 10th time you've asked me. For the person, it's the first time they've asked. And we need to have staff who can keep that forefront. Now, if it is, what time's my daughter coming? What time's my daughter coming? Can you tell me what time my daughter's coming? Or what time's lunch? What time's lunch? What time's lunch today? If it's a repetitive questioning like that, then I'll go back and say again, they can't keep the information in here, so you need to put it out there. And the best way you can do that is give them a cue card. And on the cue card, you would put something like, my daughter visits me at 2 o'clock every day, or lunch is at 12 o'clock, dinner is at 5 o'clock. And that person can carry that cue card around their neck. They can keep it in their handbag, they can keep it in their shirt pocket, and we can teach the person to use it by saying, now you have something in your bag that tells you that, and you encourage them to get out and to read the cue card. So again, it's about what is a repetitive questioning about. If it's something that you can provide the answer, that's fine. If it's somebody that they enjoy telling you a story, we had one lady who loved telling you the same story over and over and over again. She loved it. And it was a story that, brought her joy and put a smile on her dial. And she used to tell you a joke at the end, and she would watch for your reaction, and we would laugh with her. It was the first time she told it. You know, that doesn't matter. You certainly are not going to say to somebody, I've heard that 50 times today. Don't do that. That's not respectful, kind care. And we can divert people and get people doing something else that brings them pleasure and talking about something else, and steer it. You can steer it into another direction in a kind way.
Alors, une autre question très pratico-pratique. Quand un changement doit avoir lieu dans l'environnement de la personne atteinte de troubles de la mémoire, par exemple, vous avez donné l'exemple de la montre, mais il peut y avoir des changements plus importants dans l'environnement. Comment accompagner la personne pour que justement ce changement ne crée pas une anxiété trop importante? Puisque la mémoire procédurale, elle existe depuis longtemps, mais cette acquisition nouvelle d'un objet nouveau, comment est-ce qu'on peut l'accompagner?
Sometimes it's slowly. And it is, what is it that you're trying to change? What is it that you're trying to get the person to adapt to? Now, it may be moving into a care community, for example. So, first impressions are so important. How do we, again, going back to the environment, how do we create an environment that is inviting, that is welcoming, that will reduce people's anxieties? Because you're getting people, moving into a care community or going to a day centre for the first time are all highly anxiety-producing situations for people. So how do you reduce that anxiety? And it might be, again, through signage, it might be through chocolates or flowers, it might be through a buddy system, it might be through, team members taking on to look after that person and to introduce them around the care community. Again, it depends very much on who the person is, what sort of person they are, and, what is important to them. I think that we sometimes have this belief that, what's an example, that all people in aged care want to play bingo, or all people in aged care want to do this and do that. And so, again, we don't look at, there are many people in aged care who hate bingo. Yeah. So we need to always be aware of how are people responding to the environment and how do we adapt that. When we've got so many people, we do have large numbers, but how do we set up environments that are more inclusive and conducive to reduced anxiety and calmer environment, if you like.
Merci beaucoup Anne. Nous avons fait le tour des, en tout cas le tour des questions qui nous ont été adressées. Pour conclure, merci encore une fois en tout cas pour cet exposé, parce que voilà, on reprend vraiment, on voit à quel point l'observation dans cet environnement, comme dans tous les environnements, est absolument clé. Comment cette observation va nous permettre d'adapter l'environnement pour répondre aux besoins de chacun. Et c'est ce que vous avez expliqué avec beaucoup de détails concernant les personnes âgées. C'est adapter l'environnement humain, social. C'est donc notre regard, changer notre regard, adapter aussi l'environnement physique. Donc tout l'aménagement, les signes, tout ce qui peut être écrit pour accompagner les personnes âgées. Et puis aménager aussi l'environnement temporel. C'est cet environnement qui va justement permettre des relations et des interactions respectueuses et qui va permettre en fait de préserver l'autonomie. Et on est vraiment dans cette idée de préserver l'autonomie, parce que c'est cette autonomie qui donne à chacun la possibilité d'agir, la possibilité de contribuer à la vie collective, la possibilité de contribuer à une communauté. Et quelque part, c'est cette contribution et ce sentiment d'appartenance qui est essentiel à l'épanouissement de tout un chacun. Et si on enrichit la personne, indirectement, nous allons enrichir la communauté tout entière à laquelle elle appartient. Et c'est en créant ce cercle vertueux que nous allons pouvoir avoir une société où chacun trouve sa place et où chacun se sent valorisé. Et en fait, ceci est valable pour le tout petit enfant, comme pour la personne âgée, comme pour tous nos aînés. Merci encore Anne pour en tout cas pour cette conférence. Si vous avez la possibilité, évidemment, cette information est bien tardive. Anne va effectuer va donner une formation de 3 jours, demain, mardi, mercredi et jeudi, à l'Institut Supérieur Maria Montessori. Donc là, l'idée, ça va être de rentrer beaucoup plus dans le détail de comment aménager l'environnement, comment prendre soin des personnes âgées. Voilà, Anne va nous faire participer et va nous faire partager tout son savoir. Évidemment, vous êtes les bienvenus. Vous pouvez nous contacter pour vous inscrire à cette formation. Et pas d'inquiétude, puisque nous allons effectivement avoir d'autres formations de ce type-là à l'avenir. N'hésitez pas en tout cas à nous rejoindre et à nous interroger pour toute demande de formation. Voilà, merci beaucoup en tout cas à toutes et à tous de nous avoir écoutés. Merci encore Anne d'être venue de si loin jusqu'à nous pour nous parler de ce sujet passionnant et à très bientôt. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.